Welcome, everyone, to the Real News Network. My name is Maximilian Alvarez. I'm the editor-in-chief here at the Real News, and it's so great to have you all with us. For so many of us, from the time we spend as kids on the living room floor watching cartoons to the countless hours we spend after work getting lost in our favorite streamed series, some of the deepest, most meaningful attachments that we develop to movies and television shows are forged with love for the animated works that dazzle us, entertain us, make us laugh, and make us cry. And when the COVID-19 pandemic hit and live action productions in Hollywood were put on pause, animated productions carried on, providing millions and millions around the world with entertainment as they have for over a century, while life as we knew it was turned upside down. But it may shock many to learn that the many, many talented workers who make Hollywood animation happen have long struggled with gross pay inequities, limited opportunities for advancement, and less crediting and residual compensation than their live action counterparts represented by the Writers Guild of America, or the WGA. And this is why many in the industry are calling for a new deal for animation, as the Animation Guild, or TAG, returned to the bargaining table this week to continue working out a new contract with the Alliance of Motion Picture and Television Producers after talks stalled in December of last year. The Animation Guild comprises Local 839 of the International Alliance of Theatrical Stage Employees, or IATSE, and represents thousands of animation and visual effects artists. In the current negotiations, as Alex Press recently wrote in Jacobin magazine, quote, "Tag writers are pushing for pay parity with WGA members. Animation writers make a minimum of $2,064 per week, while WGA weekly minimums range from $4,063 to $5,185. That comes out to tag writers making 41 to 52 cents on the dollar per week compared to live action writers. Whereas experienced WGA writers can negotiate wages well above the minimums, animators have a harder time doing so, with studios refusing to pay above that minimum. Animators, both in television and film, do not receive the same residuals as WGA productions either, no matter how big a hit they create. In addition to the disparity in compensation, there's the issue of credits. Animation writers get staff writer or story editor credit, but nothing higher, such as a producer credit, until they are running a show. That makes it harder for animation writers to work in live action without starting over from the bottom, no matter how many decades of experience they may have. Animation writers have long pushed for a change to crediting, but say it has been a non starter in negotiations, as a change in credits would need to be reflected in writer pay as well. End quote. So, to talk about all of this and more, I'm honored to be joined by three TAG members to discuss the kind of work that they do and what the industry looks like from their vantage point. David Scher is a storyboard artist and writer with 11 years' experience in the animation industry, working on such projects as Looney Tunes, Fish Hooks, and SpongeBob SquarePants. He was part of the team that shaped the storyboard proposal in this year's negotiations. And Rachel Cohen is a cartoonist and color designer who worked in collaboration with the TAG Color Design Committee to raise awareness of wage inequity and unfair working conditions for color designers. And Joey Clift is a comedian, TV writer, and Animation Guild volunteer. He created the hashtag #PayAnimationWriters, which trended #1 on Twitter in the state of California leading up to the negotiations. So David, Rachel, Joey, thank you so much for joining me today.
Thanks for having us.
Thanks so much for having us.
Our pleasure.
Now, I want to give a clear disclaimer up top for our viewers and listeners that since contract negotiations resumed earlier this week, we do not want to jeopardize those negotiations, and we will not be asking David, Rachel, or Joey to be commenting directly upon those negotiations. But we will be bringing y'all follow-up coverage on this important struggle, and we will also be linking to great articles like the one from Alex Press and Jacobin to give y'all some much-needed background on these negotiations. But, to start off, I think that, it would be great to hear a little more from each of you all about your own path into the industry, the different kind of work that y'all do. I mean, this is something that we try to do all the time here at The Real News and on my podcast, Working People, right? I said it up top. We all enjoy the fruits of the work that you and your coworkers do, but so little of that work is actually visible to us. And it's really at times like these when folks need to be showing solidarity with the people who make Hollywood happen, that we start to get a glimpse into what that day-to-day, week-to-week work life is for y'all. So I guess, can we go around the table and give viewers and listeners a bit of an insight into your own path into the industry, the kind of work that you do, and I guess what a quote unquote typical week looks like for you?
I'm happy to start. First off, thank you so much for that lovely intro. Before I get into my background, I just wanted to stress this is not just an animation writer issue or a color designer issue or a storyboard artist issue or a director issue. This is all of us working in animation, some of the most talented artists around, demanding that we all receive a fair shake, fair pay, and fair treatment from the studios who are making billions and billions of dollars off of our work. And to get to my background, so I grew up really loving animation shows like The Simpsons, King of the Hill, Family Guy, etc. were some of my favorite shows growing up. Unfortunately, I'm Native American. I'm an enrolled member of the Cowlitz Indian tribe, and I grew up on the Tulalip Indian Reservation. And because I didn't see any like native TV writers or native animation writers growing up, I just didn't think I was like allowed to work in animation. So instead, I went to school for completely different craft. And fortunately, kind of my professors gave me the right compliments to actually move to Los Angeles and give the entertainment industry and animation writing a shot. This was in around 2010, and I really just spent the next 5 to 6 years like grinding away, trying to get my in the industry, doing a lot of live comedy, and I finally got my first freelance writing script in 2014, 2015, after 5 years of, sleeping on couches, working odd jobs to get it. Did various other kind of, freelance animation writing jobs here and there over the next couple of years, sometimes going, months or years between gigs. And then finally in 2020, I was staffed on my first show for a major streaming service. And I've been working on it ever since. But I just wanted to say that to stress that for a lot of us, like, these are careers that we spend, like for me, I spent a decade of my life working to get into the writer's room for a TV show. These are difficult jobs to get. And, I think that my personal story, being native, is that because the industry is so hard to get into and because the pay is so low for animation writers when you do get into it, it really puts writers from disadvantaged communities in I would say a tough position to make it in the industry. If you're not born wealthy, how are you going to go 2 years without work while still focusing on your craft and developing your skills? Like, you can't do that without taking like odd jobs to pay your bills. And, so I think that that's like also what we're fighting for, as a part of these negotiations. And like, what's so important about like our fair treatment and increased wages is like, like Hollywood has a diversity problem, and like paying people a little bit more and being like nicer to people at the entry levels is like a surefire way to improve that issue and make that better.
Yeah, I guess I'll talk about how I started. I'm from New York. I did some drawing growing up, but I liked it. But just at a certain point, it was like, oh, you can't do animation because you have to be talented from when you were born to do it. And so I was like, oh, I don't think I'm like that good. So, I kind of put that to the side and kind of had some other interests I was focusing on, like studying animals and things. It wasn't until like I was in my mid-20s I started doing improv in New York. And that really got me into sort of like thinking and comedy and just sort of like deciding like what do I really want to do. And then I came back to animation, which had acting in it and which I really liked. And I just needed to learn how to draw better. So I decided to. Luckily, I was able to go to art school and try it out, and I realized I could focus on something that's like an art project for like 30 to 40 hours. Not straight. That would be insane. You'd have to put numbers on my back like a marathon person. But I was pretty much just like I knew I figured out I could do it. So I learned to draw there, and then made some connections while I was in school. Just worked really hard, and sometimes recruiters would come up there. And so when I moved down to LA afterwards, after about a year or so of trying, I did the internship at Nickelodeon. And then it was a year after that of just sort of like taking tests. It's like auditioning for a job, doing some of those, getting better at my craft, learning to draw, doing more portfolio samples, throwing things out that didn't work. I remember getting decimated during a portfolio review, and like I had to just get rid of all my college work and just start anew. But eventually I passed my first, it wasn't my first test, it was like my seventh test by that point. But it was for a storyboarding and writing job on the show Fish Hooks at Disney television animation. So I got started there. I did a board for them freelance, and then was able to become a storyboard revisionist, which sometimes they'll refer to as an entry-level job for storyboard, but I consider it just as important as a storyboard artist. It's just someone coming later in the process. They're the ones who kind of fixes mistakes, sometimes does new acting depending on what the voice actors have done, and sometimes writes a lot of things. So those are two different jobs in storyboarding: storyboard artist and storyboard revisionist. Right now, after about 11 years, I am a storyboard artist, and I'm at Nickelodeon right now. So it's been good, but I've been on a couple of different kinds of shows doing storyboards. There's scripted shows where you get a script prior to doing the storyboard, or there's outline driven shows or storyboard driven shows, they're also called, where you get an outline, kind of like could be a paragraph long, could be just a page just saying like how the story is going to go. And then I go in and write as well as draw, write pretty much most of the dialogue, draw it, and storyboard it. So I've done both of those kinds of shows. So yeah, love to talk about that too.
So I come from a comics background. Usually when people want to work in animation, they think, oh, I'm going to apply to CalArts. I'm going to go straight into a career. I applied to CalArts and I got rejected, which was fine because I couldn't afford to go anyway. So I busted my ass. I was fortunate enough to land gigs coloring a few comics that I really love. And eventually I landed a job in 2019 on Infinity Train on Cartoon Network. And I want to talk about what a color designer actually does, because I think it's such a vague job title. Like, I tell people I'm a color designer, and what I usually say is that I turned doing coloring books into a career. But basically what we do is like take black and white line art for props and characters into color. So like anything you see on the screen that's moving was colored by a color designer. And that pretty much sums it up. And we are facing like this crazy wage discrepancy between other design roles, where we earn 14.4% less than other design roles for some reason. Actually, I know the reason. It's because in the past, the only role that a woman could take in animation was in the ink and paint department. And those women would paint the cells that the male employees would draw. So it's historically a female-led role in a male-dominated industry. So that is the root of all this, and that's what we're trying to change.
Man, and you know, this is why I love kind of having these conversations, right? Because even just with the three of you, I'm realizing how little I know about how animation happens, right? I think back to God, I think there's this. I swear this was an old Rocco's Modern Life episode, but maybe something a little more current is there's this episode in Parks and Recreation, right, where this character Ben. Granted, he's doing claymation, but he spends like weeks and weeks and weeks doing this kind of stop motion claymation movie, and he's so proud of it, and he wants everyone to see it, and he's like, "This is going to be the next Titanic." And the thing lasts like 10 seconds. And he's like, that was months of work. That's what I think of. Like, I just think of all the frames, all the detail, all the adjustments that y'all were talking about. And so I wanted to maybe just kind of follow up on that and keep that ball rolling and ask y'all if you could kind of get it even more granular and describe for us kind of the, again, what the sort of work that you do day in, day out entails, and like also the other kinds of stuff that are happening behind the scenes to make these, you know, animated productions what they are when we as kind of viewers end up seeing them on the screen.
So first I wanted to tag off of Rachel's point about I had no idea that that was the reason for the color designer pay discrepancy up until I think the start of, you know, when our negotiation started a few months ago. And it's wild. It's like our reasons for like, it's wild how our like low pay compared to other sections of the industry is like rooted in stuff like that, where it's just like, hey, we can fix that like crazy misogyny pay disparity from 70 years ago.
Yeah.
It's 2022. We don't still have to like use that as the barometer for why this craft is paid, you know, so much less than other crafts, even within the animation guild. So like, yeah, like I got fired up on all color designers' behalfs upon seeing that. So yeah, it's I don't know, pardon my French, it's way fucked up. And so what I do in my day to day, I'm an animation writer. So you know, I pitch the story ideas, I write the scripts, I help create the characters, I you know, help finesse the scripts farther down the line, joke punch ups and stuff like that. I'm primarily a comedy writer. And you know, I would say that like really as a writer on an animated show or any TV show, regardless of medium, if it's animation or live action, is you're creating the world that the characters live in, and you're creating the characters in that world, and you're putting the words in their mouth to live in that world. So you know, it's like they say, like, you know, everything kind of starts with a script. So like that's essentially what our job is. And you know, and what's something that is so, you know, I guess like infuriating for me and a lot of this is that like that's your job as a writer, regardless of whether you're an animation or live action. A script for an animation writer looks exactly the same as a script for a live action writer. Your story break meetings are basically the same. If you've got seasonal stories, you're breaking those seasonal arcs the exact same way. It's just we're paid, you know, like you said, like less than half of what live action writers make, just based on the medium that we're on, even though our stories have, you know, the same and oftentimes more complexity. I mean, like somebody on the chat mentioned that you worked on Infinity Train. That's like a hugely complicated show in terms of the story. And it's like, that's, you know, like that's a story that like, I mean, all animation writers deserve to be paid fairly, but that's a story that like a lot of like heart and sweat and tears went into creating that show, the same amount that goes to any live action show. So those writers should be paid fairly for that work. And, you know, I would say that like outside of, you know, when I'm on staff on a show, you know, cranking out scripts or outlines or, you know, springboards or, you know, helping punch up scripts every week, you know, a lot of my job is this is a freelance industry. It's like, it's not like you don't apply for a job and then work at that job for 30 years. Like you're on a job from anywhere from a couple weeks to, you know, a couple months to like maybe a year or two if you're really lucky. So, you know, a lot of my time when I'm not in the writer's room is spent, you know, developing other projects, writing other scripts, and doing things that I'm like, you know, not paid for to develop my craft so I can hopefully get the next job. So, you know, it's an industry where we're like constantly hustling. And, you know, I think like back to the live action animation, like pay disparity, like that's one of the reasons that live action writers make, you know, are paid so well, is that like it's to allow them to weather those storms of months and years between jobs. And, you know, because we don't have the same benefits, we often run into the situation of like ending a job and then you don't get a job in 3 months, so your health insurance ends. So we're like scrambling not just to find work, we're also scrambling to like get more hours so we can get our health insurance back. So like, the increased, pay, residuals, and all that the live action writers get are designed to allow us to weather the storm through the lean times. As people working in the animation industry, we just don't see those same benefits when we should, because we're doing the same work.
Totally. Yeah. I here with that for sure. It's my ex-girlfriend was a live action writer, and it was just it was the exact same. It's the exact same job that everyone's doing. You're creating a story, a world, a script. You have a script. You have the same thing at the end there, with the characters that exist, and everyone should be paid similarly. People do go from live action to animation. I've seen and back again. And it's just sad that there would be such a big discrepancy between animation and live action that people like, that work in animation, they strive to go into live action sometimes to get even just that higher pay. And I think the scripts would potentially be a lot better in that, they're great in animation, but I think the people that say don't want to work for that lower amount of money, they're trying to go, up, and they consider animation not as great of a gig because of the pay. And the thing is, it's a great gig, and some of the best shows, highest rated shows on television are animated, and most widely known. So, it's definitely something to be corrected. It really makes no sense. Some animated shows in primetime do have WGA rates, but that should be the case for all of them. They're all making money. They're all on either cable or streaming, and they get viewers. They really get viewers of all ages, the whole family, whereas some shows don't have that family range. That's totally agree with that. So in terms of storyboarding, what we do, if there is a script, we'll come in and we'll make the first visual representation, generally, of what that script is saying. So we're basically laying down the first drawings, the first in-camera drawings for the entire script. They call it almost like the blueprint of the show. You also can consider storyboarding like you're building a house. You're kind of taking the elements of the script and putting it almost like in a comic strip form that's going to be followed by everyone else down the line. As well as the animation studio, whoever is actually animating it, they'll follow the actual storyboards. It's basically almost like a comic strip of the entire cartoon put together using that script as the basis. Maybe the script's more of a blueprint. Maybe that's the way to say it. But really, that's the thing. If you happen to be writing as a storyboard artist, you might know how the story goes. You'll have that outline. If you don't have an outline, you might write one for yourself. Occasionally, storyboard artists do write outlines. Depends on the show, which they should get paid for as well if they do. And then if they are writing it, they'll write the dialogue, which they should also get paid for as the script. I'll tell you what, the thing that the writers are asking for also applies to storyboard artists in lots of cases. In a storyboard-driven show where the storyboard artist is doing the writing, they are creating the script. So I think they should be compensated as well for almost doing another job as well as their own job storyboarding. And so the writers and storyboarders, we have like a connection here in these negotiations that we're hoping to remedy. As well, lately, the storyboard job has in the past 20 to 30 years, especially with computers coming on nowadays, some jobs that used to exist in animation have been sucked into storyboarding. So storyboard artists are now doing the job of maybe about at least two other art jobs that used to exist. Character layout is now a storyboard thing. Layout could be a storyboard thing. We are doing very clean drawings that the animators totally have to, they'll follow. We're doing lots of different jobs. The writing, for instance, that has been in the past, but basically storyboard artists do a lot of different jobs, and we think that we should be compensated every time we do a different job. We're also doing even editing now. Editing is part of it because you can time in the storyboard program that they give us. And that's an editor's job. The editors should be doing that job. Sometimes shows are asking the storyboard artists to edit animatics, making their storyboard with sound, music, and dialogue into a almost pretty much a cartoon that hasn't been fully animated yet. That's a whole different job that we feel like we should be compensated for. So that's kind of the thing that storyboard artists are running into nowadays.
I just want to co-sign that 1,000%. And yeah, like if this was a live action show, if somebody was writing on the show and acting in the show, they would get 2 paychecks. So storyboard artists, you should get 7 paychecks.
That's Joey. And you should get a huge, much bigger one. You should, oh my gosh.
Yeah, we should all get paid the studios can afford it. They make billions of dollars off of us.
Mm-hmm. Totally.
I saw a number on social media the other day. I think it was like 4 out of 5 of the top streamed movies last year were animated. And yet, I mean, I absolutely believe I would love to see storyboarders making live action writer money. That would be amazing.
Yeah, it all needs to rise up. We're seeing like, we're making these great things and the profits just aren't coming to us the way we can to live our lives as they would like a live action person. Especially like, think about the healthcare you mentioned, Joe. My gosh, it's like you need a certain amount of hours to get even health benefits. And it's like, if you're working freelance, which I mean, a lot of cartoons are doing that. They're hiring a lot of freelance people. You're not getting that consistent hours you need to go through the lean times, like you said, that's very important. And it's something that's, I don't think that's too much to ask for. I think that definitely should be something we don't have to worry about. It's tough. Yeah.
Oh yeah.
Well, and then you throw into there, right, what Rachel was saying earlier, right? It's not like there are great reasons for these disparities, right? And quite the opposite, right? And I guess I would encourage viewers and listeners to dig a little deeper into that history as I was doing to prepare for this interview. And I myself was pretty kind of shocked and horrified by what I found. And I want to kind of dig into that in a second. But, Rachel, I wanted to follow up really quick because you started describing, right, what color design entails. But I guess like, again, for the lay person, for someone who actually, like only knows coloring and coloring books, like what does that look like? Are you using, are you like Bob Ross with a palette? Are you using like these complex computer programs? I guess what goes into all the color design work that you do?
Yeah, so I can elaborate on that. So the start of the process is the black and white design department will get all of the props and characters cleaned up into clean line art. And then it gets sent to us and we will color those in Photoshop. And that can mean like we get 50 props for 1 2-week cycle for one episode. But that 50 can be multiplied into however many, you know what I mean? Like one asset can be multiplied into 5 different variations based on lighting needs, based on different scenarios that need to take place in the episode. So another issue we face in this craft is that we are undervalued and understaffed frequently. The last show I worked on had 1 color designer when at the end of production we had like 5 people doing color design because we were all doing catch up for that one struggling artist. So yeah, that's another issue we're facing, is that productions just don't value this role because it's considered entry level, much like revisionists who are facing their own problems. Yeah.
Yeah. If you want to see some, like, this is something that my eyes have been so opened by the work that the color design committee at the Animation Guild has done to get the word out about this. And like viewers, if you want to see just like some of these horror stories of the amount of work that color designers have to do for the rate that they're doing, I would definitely suggest checking out the hashtag equal pay for equal paint on Twitter. There's a lot of really good graphics, comics, and things like that like will hopefully educate you about like the work that this craft that like makes our shows look amazing does for like nowhere near the amount of appreciation they deserve for that work.
Totally. Yeah. I don't know. I'd also want to say that when some of these jobs described as like thinking like an entry level thing, I don't think there's any entry level job in animation. I think they're all they all take a great amount of skill, professionalism, and hard work to get done. There's really, I don't, yeah, I think once you're on the show and you have a slot there in the cast and crew, I don't think there's any entry level anymore. You're doing it, whatever it is, you are doing it, you're doing it hard, and you're doing it. You're even thinking about it in your off hours too. You're not just doing it the 40 hours a week that were scheduled. You're coming up with ideas in the shower, like things that, as you take walks, like things just might spring up. And if you're in a creative field, that's when a lot of the stuff, comes to you. Sometimes it doesn't come while you're working. So this isn't a job you just leave behind. This is something that's on us all the time as we're working.
Yeah, like if I'm on script and I'm trying to figure out a character issue, I'm not going to stop working just because it's 5 or 6. I'm probably going to be working into the night trying to figure it out.
Mm-hmm. Right. And, they know that, right? I mean, the studios know that, right? They expect that. They bank on that, right? It becomes part of the model. I mean, I say that for myself. I'm speaking only for myself, but I'm thinking of like when we interviewed a number of your IATSE siblings a few months ago when there was a strike looming, right? We talked about kind of all the stuff that goes into set design, all the camera work, all the, back room, like kind of costume design and invoicing and all that stuff. There is a sort of kind of taken for granted aspect like there is in a lot of other jobs. I think of academia where, I used to be years ago. They know that you're not going to turn that clock off, right? They know that you're going to keep working on whatever it is that you need to get done to meet that deadline. And, it was the same when we were working, retail, when we were working at warehouses and factories. I guess listeners and viewers of The Real News, this probably won't be that big of a surprise for anybody, but wage theft is probably one of the greatest unacknowledged crimes that goes on every day in this country. That's what it means in a lot of regards, right? It is getting free labor out of people. It is expecting people to do that extra work that they're essentially not being adequately compensated for or compensated for at all. And all the sheer amount of wages that are stolen in that fashion from blue collar workers to white collar workers is truly staggering. And I wanted to kind of thread that together with the point that y'all were just making about the sort of visibility that the work that y'all do has gained during these negotiations, particularly through kind of, putting the message out online with these hashtags, with these videos that we've been seeing floating around Twitter and Instagram and elsewhere. I wanted to ask, like, as these negotiations have gone on, and as more people have been taking notice of the issues that we're talking about here, what have you found like your average person is like most surprised to learn about your industry and the work that you do? I mean, I for me, the biggest thing, and I should have known this, but I did not realize how big the disparity was between live action and animation roles, let alone the history of how that disparity came to be. But it did blow my mind. So I'm wondering for each of y'all, yeah, like what have you been hearing from folks as you've been, getting more interest from them and they've been asking more questions? What do you find the average person just doesn't know about the way that this industry is run and what workers like yourselves go through on a weekly basis?
Yeah, I would say that there are a couple of issues, and this is something that the IATSE negotiations of the fall, I think, really illuminated, is just like how hard people in the entertainment industry work. I believe the IA Stories Instagram account has really illuminated a lot of just like horror stories of just like the amount of work that like people are putting in on these productions that can afford to pay us more and treat us better. They just don't because corporate greed or whatever. And I would say that definitely to your point, a lot of what I'm hearing are people, even like working writers, people that work in animation or live action, like reaching out to me and like my friends and saying that they had no idea that there was such a pay disparity between live action and animation. Everybody just kind of assumes that writing is writing and that we all would get paid the same amount of money for this writing, which like in a perfect world, yes, but like due to just, how our contracts have been, negotiated in years prior, union busting by the studios and et cetera, like we're just in a position where we're just not getting that. And that's what we're fighting for. And to me, like a lot of the, I guess, like what really fires me up about this and turns it into just like a really strong moral issue for me is that we do this job because it's our dream job. We love telling stories. Like we work in this industry because when we were kids, this is what we dreamed of doing, even if we didn't know that that's what we could dream of doing, And I feel like, like I mentioned, for me, it took me a decade to get my first staff writing job of just like relentless, constant work on my own time. And I think that the studios and people in the entertainment industry use that to exploit us into working for a lower rate. While meanwhile, they're profiting so much off of our work. I think there's a statistic. I think SpongeBob has made $11 billion for somebody or something like that. SpongeBob has made billions of dollars of that show alone. The CEOs of studios, you can Google it. It's really easy to see. Saw like record profits last year. I think that the CEO of one network got like a $40 million raise or something like that. $40 million raise or a $40 million bonus in 2021. Meanwhile, color designers are making very low rates. Storyboarders are making very low rates. Writers, the people that are making these shows that are making a CEO a 20, 30, $40 million raise per year are seeing all the money. And the people that are like putting their heart and sweat into these things because it's our dream are seeing none of that and being paid like exploitation wages for that. Like, like we broke it down that if you're writing a freelance script, when you take agent, manager, and lawyer fees out of it, we're only making like $3 above minimum wage per hour. Like, so it's such a low rate for what we're working. And I feel like this is something that people just aren't getting. And plus, like just the sheer amount of like work and skill and the different kinds of jobs that are in the animation guild, which, David and Rachel have definitely pointed out, are also just like blind spots for people. They had no idea there are all these like highly specialized, trained, amazing artists doing this work and not getting compensated well for it.
Yeah, I would say a lot of people, they might not know the pipeline. Like basically there's this, the thing that they know is like maybe it's, so you draw like make a drawing for 24 for a second, right? You make 24 drawings a second, then it's animated, and that's pretty much the thing. And you have to, you kind of, when you go into the actual pipeline of how these things are done, they're like, I think they're wowed by how many different jobs are actually there. To make an animated cartoon. There's so many. I'm probably going to miss a bunch, but you go from writing to storyboard. There's a director overseeing all of this. There's like writing storyboard. There's producers and executive producers also overseeing, but writing storyboard, and then generally after storyboard, you might have some design prior, but it goes to design after storyboarding. And so there's character designers, prop designers, the people who draw the background designers. There's background painting where they paint those backgrounds. And then the color designers, which are in charge of the color for all the characters and the props and basically anything that aren't the backgrounds, but they have to match the backgrounds. And that's, again, like you were saying, Rachel, with all the different scenarios in a story, we can run into 5 different ways to light this particular prop. That's why you're taking it into nighttime, you're taking it into daytime. And these are things that this is highly skilled work. There's also timing directors, retake directors, animatic editors. Editing is a big part of this as well. we're making a show, and so making people aware of all these steps are like, wow, it opens their eyes to like, whoa, this is a whole crew, this is a whole assembly line of people that are doing this thing, and we're and making great stuff, and that's when it eventually comes to us. Even, and heck, the animation itself, a lot of times it's not even done in our studio. We're doing the pre-production. The animation's being sent overseas or to Canada or someplace to actually get animated. Some of it's animated here in the United States. It would be nice if most of it was, but generally that's another thing where the business kind of cuts some corners in terms of pay to get things done in other places, and then it comes back here for post-production for the retakes and things. There's also a whole production department, which is production coordinators and production managers and production assistants and the line producer that are overseeing the budget and making sure that everything gets done on time. So all these jobs are there, and they're all they're all not getting the wages of a lot of that the live action equivalent gets. And we're doing similar stuff, if not a little bit harder, because again, we're in control of all the actors here. These actors don't go home. We're basically, when we're doing the acting as a storyboard artist or as a writer, you're doing all the characters. You're in charge of all of them. It's like, oh my God. So you're covering a lot of jobs there. Also the voiceover actors, they're great. And that's another job entirely that's there. That is another creative thing that's brought. So, anywho, that's usually what you have to tell people about, is that the actual pipeline, so that they, then they know.
Yeah. One thing that people always ask me when I bring up my job is how we are doing in the pandemic, being able to work. And that's like one of the nice things about animation, is that we're able to work from home, but that also means that, these companies are really reliant upon us to produce work, because in the pandemic, other media is not so easily made. You know what I mean? Like, people can't get together and make movies. Other forms of media were put on hold for a long time, but we were still working. And yet, we still face these huge wage discrepancies. But it also means that people who were working in live action wanted to come into animation so that they could continue to work and make money, which would be wonderful. But I have heard stories where the vast majority of the budget goes to those live action creatives, and the animation people, the people in our union, obviously they're not making that money, which sucks. And then David, you touched on this a little bit, but I want to bring up the even greater discrepancy, that the production staff makes so much less than anybody in our union. And I know they have been fighting to become a part of TAG. I don't have a whole lot of perspective on this, but they are so critical to a smoothly run show. I can't even begin to tell you the horror stories I've heard by people don't want to fill these roles because they don't pay very much. DPAs, PAs. I would love to see them get higher wages as well.
Yeah, just to tag off of that, like a script coordinator role for an animated show, you're doing the job of a writer's assistant, a script coordinator, probably also a writer's PA, probably probably production coordinator, probably 6 other jobs that I don't even know about. And, you're just paid the one very low rate for doing that. So yeah, I definitely absolutely echo what Rachel said about like something that I often say to my friends who are script coordinators is this fight, we're fighting so hard now, not just for our own generation, but also because we want the future writers, storyboard artists, color designers to be treated well. Because this discrepancy has existed for, 60 years at this point. And I think that our generation, especially with like a lot of our efforts, with the negotiations committee and also, our efforts on Twitter, getting the word out and just being fired up about it is like, oh yeah, that discrepancy stops today. Like that, it's like not okay anymore. It was never okay, but like now we're like real fed up about it. And I just wanted to tag on what Rachel said. Like, yeah, I mean that's also a thing that I think, just speaking from the writer perspective, um, live action writers, like animation writers, are devalued even within our own craft. Um, if a live action writer making WGA rates gets a job on an animated show, they can negotiate for a way higher rate on an animated show than even animation writers who've been doing this for decades can, just by virtue of them having worked on a live action show. Because, like, as we know, the society that we live in is like the amount that you're paid is directly correlated to your value and worth as a creative. So, I mean, that's something that, just as a writer, like fires me up, is when I hear of like live action writers who have zero experience in animation writing on an animation show and immediately getting a way higher rate than somebody who's been working in animation for a decade, 2 decades. Like that's like fucked, that's like just like total shit. And I think that like, and that's not to say that that's any hate on those writers. Like ultimately, like they're making below WGA rates to write on an animated show, even if they're making more than tag rates. We should all be paid well. It's just like that's an example of like how we're, I don't know, yeah, like just mistreated and devalued even within our own craft as compared to other writers,
Well, and I mean it's especially egregious, right? As y'all have said a number of times, right? But this, I guess, is a very important common theme that has come through in so many of the discussions that I've had with so many different types of workers here on the Real News, my podcast, Working People, and all the news stories that folks have been following over the past year and beyond. Right? Is workers have sacrificed. Obviously, the different kinds of work that we do means that we've all had different experiences throughout the COVID-19 pandemic. Some of us were fortunate enough to work from home. I'm not equating our experience with those who were not, with those who struggled for PPE and those who had to brave, going in and shopping, for doing gig work and shopping for people who were comfortably staying at home. I'm not saying that. What I'm saying is that, we all did what we had to do to survive, to get by. But it's not like we were all as a society collectively suffering. A lot of people made a lot of money over the past 2 years, right? And this has been something that we've talked about a number of times on the Real News, right? When John Deere workers went on strike in November, they were saying we've made this company more profitable than it has ever been. When Kellogg's workers went on strike, when Frito-Lay workers and Nabisco workers went on strike, they pointed out the same thing. When Heavens Hill distillery workers went on strike, they said the same thing. They said when people were staying home and eating and cooking indoors more, demand for Kellogg's went way up. Demand for Heaven Hill distillery went way up. And workers are the ones who met that demand, right? And yet the same kind of people and companies that have been profiting handsomely from our labor and our sacrifices are not sharing the love, right? They're not adequately paying workers fairly for for the labor that they've done. And I think that thinking about Hollywood and entertainment is another essential part of that, right? Because for so many of us, especially before there were vaccines and whatnot, how did we get by? We were glued to our TVs, right? We streamed everything that we possibly could. We depended on the work that y'all and your coworkers do. And in fact, I would, go so far as to say is it saved a whole lot of us and our sanity and kept us afloat over these past 2 years. And it has made a whole lot of money for the studios and the people at the very top. So I say that this is my long-winded way of saying, right, that we're not equating the different types of work that people do, but we are saying there's something fundamentally wrong here where the people who do the work that creates the products and services and what have you that we all depend on are sacrificing and not getting compensated fairly, while the people at the top are siphoning up all of that profit for themselves. And it's just really unfortunate, and all the more reason why folks watching and listening should take heed to what they're hearing, and really join that chorus that is getting increasingly loud of folks demanding that animation writers get paid what they deserve. And I wanted to pick up on one final thing just so we hit this point, because Joey, you were hitting on this, and I mentioned it at the top, and I wanted to make sure that it's something that's stuck for viewers and listeners, right? But that question of crediting, right, and the residuals, right? This is another kind of fine-grained detail that I think a lot of folks probably don't understand, but are rightly shocked when when it's explained to them. Would one of y'all be willing to kind of just expand on that issue before we wrap up?
Yeah, I wanted to take a couple thoughts that David and Rachel had and put them together, and kind of piggyback on what you just said. Something that's good to keep in mind is people were glued to their TVs, during kind of the early stages of the pandemic, and this was a time when it was impossible to produce live action safely. The heads of studios, the heads of networks getting tens of millions of dollar raises due to good performance in 2020 for their 2021, paychecks or whatever. That's on our backs, because animation was the only thing keeping the entertainment industry afloat and alive throughout the pandemic. So, that's something that I think makes all this burn a little bit more for me, is that's on animation writers, color designers, background people who did not take a break during this insane moment of national global tragedy that we're going for, because the content mill needs feeding or whatever. And to your point about residuals and things like that. So a big part of the issue is that something was negotiated when streaming services kind of were popularized and started up in the mid 2000s, 2008, 2009, whatever. That it was I think it's called side letter N or something like that. That's a contract thing that basically said, hey, streaming services are kind of a gamble. We don't know if they're going to do well. So can we pay you a little bit less than the union minimum, just with the attitude that this might not be successful and we got to hedge our bets a little bit. And as a union, at the time, 2008, whatever, we kind of agreed, okay, cool. This does open up a ton of writing jobs and a ton of production jobs and a ton of, animator jobs, background jobs, color designer jobs, and et cetera. So it's a good idea for us as a union to take this deal where people are working a little bit below their minimums, to hopefully help this new medium blossom. So this was in 2008, 2007. 15 years later, streaming services are some of the most popular platforms to watch media and to ingest media. And these streaming services are making billions and billions. I think I saw a statistic somewhere that it's streaming services in up until the third quarter of 2021 made $18 billion in profits or something like that. By the end of 2021, it was somewhere in the $20-30 billion range. That's billion with a B. I don't know the exact number off the top of my head. So streaming services are some of the most popular companies in the world right now, but they're still getting that side letter N deal rate for all of the crafts in animation, that basically said, hey, this is a gamble. Well, it's not a gamble. These are some of the most profitable companies in the world 15 years later, and they can afford to pay us fairly for our work. And in addition to that, with residuals, that's something that it's categorized differently for animation. We get way less than live action. Live action, if your show you get paid for writing a script for a show. And then if your show airs a rerun, you get paid again for the episode, because there's a licensing fee for, the re-airing of the episode. That's just not something that we get in animation. So that's a form of income that live action people get that animation writers don't get, even though they rerun our episodes into infinity, the exact same amount, if not more than live action. And we're also in an issue because streaming services categorize episode orders differently. Usually, if you're writing for a network show, your job is by season. A season is, 20, 24 episodes or whatever per show. So, basically you'll be writing on it per season. And then in between seasons, you're given the ability to, negotiate for better rates, promotions, and things like that. In animation writing, especially in streaming services, you'll get an episode order that might be, 100 episodes or something like that. And that's just categorized as an episode order in and of itself. And after you write it, they'll divide it into seasons. So you might write, one episode order of a show that's 100 episodes, but like maybe that's going to be 5 seasons worth of a TV show. So that like basically removes our ability to negotiate for ourselves between seasons. And because the studios, oftentimes, especially streaming services, will decide to cancel their show after an episode order because they're like, well, we got 5 seasons worth of shows, we can just call it here. Part of the reason that they do that is they don't want animation writers, artists, etc., to be able to negotiate for better rates when a new season is picked up or when a new episode order is picked up. So for a lot of us, like I'm sure it's the case across the class, but specifically for animation writers, it like locks us at like, okay, you're a staff writer for 5 seasons of a TV show. So how for the next show that you're on, are you going to be able to negotiate for like a title bump onto your next show? Because they could just be like, well, you're a staff writer. Usually we, since you weren't able to negotiate for better titles between seasons, we'll just keep you at a staff writer at this level. And that's how staff writers are kind of forced to stay at that level for years and years. There's also just like less titles in animation. A story editor for an animated show is like the second in command on the show. They're a very high title. In live action, a story editor is like one above staff writer. So like it makes it very hard for us to like move from craft to craft, animation to live action, while one, like getting the pay that we deserve and like the level that we deserve for that. And it also just makes it like impossible for us to negotiate for ourselves while working on other shows. So, these are things that I think as a union, we're also really passionate about. And as just as an animation writer, it's like, we're doing the same work. Just treat us the same as the other writers because we're all doing the same thing. Give us the same titles, give us residuals, give us the same pay. And like pay all the other crafts, pay storyboard artists, pay color designers what they're worth too. Because like I said, we're making the studios billions of dollars. SpongeBob was the most viewed show on Paramount Plus last year. And like animated shows are driving subscriptions for like all the streaming services. Like it's on our backs that you're making this money. So like fucking pay us,
Yeah, totally. Yeah, for sure. And with the writers you're talking about, that makes total sense. There in live action, you go from like you said, staff writer, story editor, and then I think you go to like supervising story editor, and then like you might get up to co-producer. Like there's all these different rankings, and then there's pay bumps that come with those. In animation, those rankings don't exist, a lot of them, and there's pay bumps as a result don't. So crossing the two, going back between them doesn't quite work in terms of how you want your career trajectory to go and how it should go. Whereas you get more experience, you get higher pay bumps. Those aren't built into animation. I think that should be something as well, so that you can go between the two of them. You're doing all the same jobs. I want to talk about the pandemic, and how we've all been working at home. You'd think, it would make it harder for us to communicate with each other. If there was something going wrong, if someone was working overtime when they shouldn't be, or didn't ask to get paid for it, or something of that nature, where they're doing something that's kind of like, doing extra work when they really shouldn't be. And all of us others would be like, hey, you shouldn't be doing that. They're not getting that at home from us. We're also separate. And so it's not as, to have the collective strength that we have now and what we're asking for amazes me, especially thank you, social media, for that. And the tags that we're putting together. Everyone's much more aware and working together to get these negotiations going on our side. And I think the work's been tremendous. I can't wait to see what happens. But you can, even within a show, there's a lot of power that I don't think a lot of people realize working on their shows. If they can get their crew together on something, to really be like, this is what we want, this show's really going to think about that. It's we did this on Looney Tunes. We weren't going to get credit for our work for writing and drawing the show. We had to fight. We all of us storyboard artists got together, all 10 of us, and the revisionists, and we're like, hey, we walked in, we're like, we need this credit. We should have this credit. We did this work. That's just credit. I mean, that's not money. That's just the credits that appear. And we had to fight. And they eventually were like, and we gave examples. We made a very clear, this in the past, you got credit. Why aren't we getting credit? And so we did. We got written by credit. So even that, besides pay, or credit is a thing. But you could also all, get together for pay. I mean, even within the show, there's so much power if you get everybody on board, and the show realizes, hey, wait, this is our staff. We are super important. There's a reason that we're hired on these shows. We're not just throwaway, replaceable people. A whole different crew would produce an entirely different show. If you want this show, you need this crew. I think there's power, and I'm so glad that we're getting this with the way we're doing right now with negotiating social media. I think there's so much power right now amongst in animation and the artists and the writers. Let's hope some good things happen.
Yeah. Something I'm hearing from people who have been in the guild for years and years is like, this is the most fired up that they've ever seen people in the guild in the history of the animation guild. And that's cool as shit. That's like awesome. I love that. Anyway, sorry, Rachel, I feel like I might have cut you off.
Oh, I did want to touch on something that you brought up earlier, side letter N, which stands for new media. I just wanted to clarify for the audience that applies to like Netflix, but it also applies to Disney, HBO, anything that used to be on TV but now has a streaming service gets cut a deal. And it's not like we need to be giving Disney a deal. They have all of the money on the planet. So I just wanted to make sure that was clear.
It's a very good and very important point. It's like getting these sweetheart cheap deals that were hashed out in a global recession when streaming services were still very new and unsure. And for Disney and HBO to be getting that, in 2022 is pretty bonkers, I guess. I'll use the I'll reserve my other words for when we stop the recording. But I mean, this is a great lead into our way of rounding out. Y'all were just talking about the kind of power that your fellow union members are expressing, and the kind of solidarity that y'all are showing with each other, the response that you're getting on social media. So as always, I wanted to kind of wrap up by thanking y'all for joining me and asking what viewers and listeners out there can do to show solidarity with y'all and your fellow union members and entertainment workers in general.
So I think the best way to support us is really to just like be vocal about this. Like, if you see, if you see anything about negotiations for animation workers, like, give us a like, give us a retweet, do a TikTok about us. Like, getting the word out has been such an important part of this process. And like any help that you can give as viewers and, as fans of the shows that we worked on, to get the word out is really, really appreciated. Some specific action items is, I believe the color design committee, which Rachel is a part of, put together a really great petition, basically just asking for people to, sign their name. It's a digital petition to say that you support all workers in the animation industry in our negotiations. I believe we've got 7,500, 8,000, something like that, signatures on it right now of people who support our guild, which is awesome. But like, every signature is just a signal to the studios that you believe that we should be paid fairly for our work. So, signing that petition, which I believe you can find on the at Color Design 839 Twitter account. I believe it's also on the Animation Guild website. Would be hugely helpful in our journey. And just like get the word out and be loud about it. And, don't just let your voice be heard that you also are mad about this. Because, like, you know, one person can be kind of quiet, but if we have an army of people tweeting about us and, you know, like I said, getting us into the #1 trending hashtag spot on Twitter, like, people take notice. Like, that's something that people in the industry notice and see, and they learn stuff that they've probably never seen before or thought about regarding our industry. And like, that's like on, you know, our followers and allies and supporters helping us spread that message. So please do that.
Yeah, I mean, generally, and you know, people, artists, you know, be a bit shyer about this kind of thing, you know, uh, we are putting ourselves out there for this to be a success, and yeah, following those hashtags, saying how you love animation and how and you know how much you love it, and you know, and knowing that people work on it and work really hard to make the things that you love and that you enjoy for your entertainment. And you know, making that aware that, you know, hey, they should be getting as much as, you know, the people who make, you know, something that's live action, you know, maybe even more. I mean, it's just getting that out there and getting the excitement going, and just like you're saying, like retweeting or putting an Instagram post, whatever you got to do. It's all very good, and just getting the knowledge out there, and yeah, just showing your support. You know, negotiations are going on right now. So this is the time to make, if you want to make an impact, this is that time. So I encourage you to put all the love you can, and that you'd like to, and we hope we have been able to entertain you throughout your life, and especially the last couple of years. And yeah, hope that you feel happy to show it. So thank you.
Yeah. I remember when I was a kid and I told my mom that I wanted to do cartoons for a living, and I explained to her the process of it. Like, to do an animation, you do one drawing and then another drawing, another, and then another drawing until you have a moving picture. And she was like, wow, that sounds really hard. Because it is really hard. And that's not even the half of it. So I just want people to be aware that these are people working on these cartoons that you love. And to educate yourself, and to hopefully, if you love the cartoons enough, to care about the people who work on them, because we care about you, and that's why we make them.
So that is Rachel Cohen, a cartoonist and color designer who worked in collaboration with the TAG Color Designer Committee to raise awareness of wage inequity and unfair working conditions for color designers. David Scher, a storyboard artist and writer with 11 years experience in the animation industry, who's worked on projects like Looney Tunes, Fish Hooks, and SpongeBob SquarePants, and who was part of the team that shaped the storyboard proposal in this year's contract negotiations. And Joey Clift, comedian, TV writer, and Animation Guild volunteer, who created the viral hashtag #PayAnimationWriters, which trended #1 on Twitter in the state of California, leading up to the negotiations. Rachel, David, Joey, thank you so much for joining me today.
Thank you.
Thank you so
thanks.
much.
This is great.
And before we break, I would be remiss if I did not make this point, because as Joey, David, and Rachel explained so beautifully, right, to bring the kind of products that we all depend on in the entertainment industry, as well as other media realms of the media industry, so many hardworking folks put their hands on those things. And that is true as much in Hollywood as it is here at The Real News. Granted, we're a much smaller team here in Baltimore, but we are a dedicated team of brilliant folks who I'm honored to work with every day. I know that for viewers and listeners, you get to see me and our other hosts and content producers, great folks like Mark Steiner, Eddie Conway, Stephen Janis, Taya Graham, Jessel Knorr, Brandon Soderberg. Who you don't see, though, are all the amazing folks who make our work possible and who we work with intimately day in, day out. And we really are honored to work together. And it is because of the team that we have that we are able to bring you the news that we bring you every week. That includes folks like our executive director, John Duda, our managing editor, Jocelyn Dombrowski, Rosette Sawali, our membership relations manager. Our brilliant studio team, Adam Coley, Dwayne Gladden, Cameron Granadino, Daryl and Soldier, who make sure that our studio downtown is kept up to code and kept safe. James Daly, our social media manager. Stephen Frank, our chief audio engineer. Kayla Rivara, our chief of staff. Jonathan Keene, our chief financial officer. I cannot thank all of them enough, and I just wanted to stress to all of you watching and listening that you should please head on over to therealnews.com/support and support the work that we are doing here so that we can keep bringing y'all important coverage and conversations just like this. For the Real News Network, I'm Maximilian Alvarez. Thank you so much for watching.